So hey everyone, I'm Jason. I'm a design technologist with Intel ICRI cities. I'll kind of define both of those. On a day-to-day basis, my background is originally in hardware engineering, but I kind of have worked in a number of different roles at Intel and within this group. I've kind of worked as sort of a prototype engineer, working kind of on both the software and hardware side for a lot of the products we do, and kind of helping get these different technology deployments and interventions that we do kind of ready for the real world. So what our group is, we're part of a number of Intel collaborative research institutes that Intel has spread throughout the world. In particular, we're kind of the London-based one, and we're part of the Intel Labs Europe network, which is a number of different research labs spread throughout Europe. And our mission, we're called ICRI cities because we focus on the general research theme of sustainable connected cities, how cities will look in the future, if and when technology has a role in preserving some of the things we find valuable in cities. So a lot of the research questions we looked at concern, kind of what makes a city great, what fuels its vibrance. We look at both the social, cultural, political, and technological elements of what makes that true. And then we kind of, take that a step further and say, cities are changing a lot over time. In particular, with the accelerating pace of technology, we see, the environment being impacted, people's communities being impacted on a day-to-day basis. So we look at how technology can play a role in making that better, preserving the things we have, and just seeing how we can use things like data and the Internet of Things to create positive behavior change and make our cities a better place to live. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the projects we have been working on in the past. Kind of the main one that we've been working on for the last year or two is a deployment called London Living Labs. And what this is a network of different Internet of Things devices that are meant to give us information about our environment. They tell us things like what the air quality is at certain locations, different environmental factors. We're looking into measuring water quality and soil quality in different parts throughout London. So we've been working on these devices and building these deployments throughout many different locations. We work with parks, local governments, the different borough councils, schools, and we engage closely with stakeholders to try to create this positive experience where technology can kind of amplify how we view our city. This has kind of been really an interesting project for me in particular to work on. I've kind of always been a big proponent of open data and open data sets, and it's been interesting to kind of see that, not as a data consumer, but as a data provider, and looking at the different responsibilities that entails. So one really interesting conclusion to that has kind of been that the relationship between us as a technology company and as a technology-focused research group and the different people that we interact with on a day-to-day basis, how do we build a relationship with them that is mutually positive, that's based on trust and respect. And it's kind of not a question that we think about a lot as technologists and scientists. We kind of tend to assume, well, if we have data, there's some underlying intrinsic value that makes it true. And if we can simply look at it in the right way, then we'll find that. And what we've learned with the ICRI is that so much of it is interpersonal. It depends so much on how we get the data, the questions that we ask ourselves. Some good examples of that are the ways in which data sets can always have underlying bias. For example, what choices do you make about where to collect data? How do you convince people that your data is not only accurate but kind of tells the right story? How do you release data in a way that makes sense, that is accompanied by context and connection to what people do, and it's not spreading data out into this black hole that no one really see or understand. So a lot of what we do is try to build these relationships that allow our stakeholders and the public at large to use data in a more effective way. And we've seen a bit about the different ways in which data can be used, and one really interesting example of that trust relationship. So the ICRI cities, we work with different academic collaborators. We work a lot with researchers from UCL and Imperial College. So one project that came out of that collaboration has been called Send City. What this was is kind of exploring how, when we have these monitoring devices, right? Every monitoring device is kind of intrusive in some way or another. You're going into someone's community and putting in technology into a park or something like that, or asking someone to wear a device in their body and give you their data. It's kind of inherently an intrusive relationship, and it's one that you really have to get people to be on board with. You want to approach that in a friendly, human way. So this project Send City was looking at if we make our devices look different, how do people respond to them? There's a big difference perceptually between putting up a black box and saying, this is filming you, this is measuring your environment, and making it friendly. So what this project did was it took these devices and redesigned them to look like animals. So, this device in particular had kind of a camera and microphone. It was meant to pick up information about its environment. And what we found is that when you design that in a friendly way, like an animal, then people kind of approach that a lot more. People are a lot willing to go up and touch it and play with it and be a part of that experience. And it's not only the friendliness of it that I think makes it effective, but also the fact that it's a lot easier to understand what's going on. Intuitively, you can see if the animal's eyes are closed and can't see you. Right, and that stands in stark contrast, I think, to a lot of the ways in which data is captured from our environment today. It's kind of just passively taken. We don't really understand. We're not really a part of that. So, yeah, in general, we're trying to build personal connections with cities, and we're trying to see how technology can make them better. I think with that, I'll kind of turn it over to Han, who can explain a lot more of these projects.
So between Jason and I, we're sort of the yin and yang. So he's a design technologist. I'm a design anthropologist. My background is in anthropology and psychology. I've worked around the world, from Japan to France, UK, India, looking at things from the future of healthcare to the future of mobility, looking at sort of how can we open up disaster management into more of a participatory sort of structure. And we think about sort of tackling the challenges that are super hard to tackle. Maybe because they're invisible. And so I think one of the reasons why I'm really glad Jason was able to sort of speak a little bit about sort of data is moving beyond sort of just assuming that data is good or assuming that people understand what to do with data. And I think in designing around data, we're actually also creating the culture that we want to live in the future, right? To be able to open up those questions about what's cool, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Why did we respond to, for example, the Snowden crisis in the way that we did? How do the ways that we design kind of create the etiquette around sort of what we consume? So one of the things that I wanted to speak about is, as an anthropologist, a lot of my work is in the field. I also work with a lot of lab researchers. But you find out a lot of really interesting things when you go out into the field. And it's the fact that when you move beyond data, you're looking for all the various cues, the motivations, the roles, about not just what people do, but why they do that, right? So as a psychologist, it's the hidden frameworks, the cognitive frameworks. We might go into it tomorrow, I'll be around. To also the environmental cues. And so working in terms of a Future Cities Research Institute, we're looking sort of 10, 15 years out about what those technologies might be. And one of the things that we're looking at a lot is urban interaction design. So it's the idea that the interaction design that we're used to sort of doing, which is maybe from one device to another device, right, looking down at your screen, is actually going to change as we have much more ubiquitous computing across sort of the environment. So what will those things feel like in a way that you actually want to invite into your life, in a way that makes you smile, in a way that doesn't feel intrusive, in a way that's respectful, right? Also, in thinking about sort of the quantified self, it's also thinking about the quantified community, right? And not just sharing knowledge, but also we had a great discussion with Robin about sort of how do we get people to curate great sets of knowledge, to be able to mentor and share their skill sets. And so these are some ideas coming down kind of on the edge about when we move past kind of just data and we get tired of it, just like I always like to use the fast food analogy, right? As food became industrialized, it also became slightly less nutritious, slightly less tasty, but it's cheap and it's good and we loved it. And all of a sudden, slow food movement came along. We started asking, where do things come from, right? We're totally not there yet in terms of data, but we will. It might be 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line. There's lots of interesting things in terms of hacking, misinformation, etc. But just think, we're on the curve of something really interesting. So tomorrow, as you design things, think about sort of how mischievous and how playful you might be. So quickly, as an anthropologist and as a designer, one of the things I think about is how do I get into the shoes of what people care about? So what you're actually looking at is, it's an elementary school over in Enfield, so that's North London. And one of the things that we're tackling right now is actually air quality. The reason why air quality is super important is because London is probably one of the worst places in Europe for air quality. We're actually getting sued. We're a test case for the EU where we're getting sued, I think, at the tune of £300 million a year because it's so horribly bad. And actually, air quality in this quote costs Europe 330 billion to 940 billion euros a year in terms of extra health costs. So something as small as and Jason provided me with this, a 5 parts per billion increase in nitrogen dioxide on average during childhood can actually lead to a 17% increase in developing asthma. This is super important because Oxford Street actually has the highest levels of NO2 in the world. What does it actually feel like to not just shop there, but to live there, to work around there? If I'm totally asthmatic. So it's actually thinking not just in the short term of behavior, right, and sort of the week's worth of data, the month's worth of data that you're looking at, but how do you actually think in terms of behavior change in the long-term level, the individual, the community, the family level, over a lifetime, so that your child doesn't grow up with asthma. So this is, they're right there at the A1110. We're actually trying to look through the eyes of children and how to create experiences in a way that evokes their voices. We try to think about sort of, as we design the messaging, how would they design the messaging in their own way. So this is how they would try to communicate to drivers. And also ultimately think about the impacts about things that are invisible within our environment that I think data and sensing and IoT can actually reveal. And we oftentimes work with population groups like children and actually say, how can we learn from you? And how can we have you lead for us? This is super important when we're actually thinking about designing emergent and innovative technologies, because how can you do that in a way that takes other people along with you on that journey, so that they can be a part of creating the world that they're actually going to live in. So one of the ways that we did that was we actually did this project and asked, can families playing a game together affect air quality? One of the things we knew was that within London, and this is TfL data and it's open, 50% of all car journeys are under 3 kilometers, and 35% are under 2 kilometers, and a lot of times they're at a standstill. And then so we assumed that one of these areas that we could possibly affect is around the school run. There's a lot of congestion usually around that. And then we asked, is there a way that we can actually create a game? And then we also deployed air quality sensors that would be able to sort of think about the quantified community in a much more interesting way, and thereby being able to sort of create healthy, happier communities by doing this. So the kids recruit minions, and that's their word for it, by the way. They recruit minions. Minions are adult players who actually walk. So they're the ones with activity trackers. In the EU, we have extremely, as you know, harsh laws around sort of privacy. So the adults walk. The kids actually earn game points to be able to play a match 3 or a Candy Crush style game. What they actually see in terms of the urban interactive environment is that this is something that we do in the Eco Club. They see the web-based interface. They can actually pester their parents and send messaging. So the parents see a completely different interface. And then ultimately, we hope to actually deploy and use public screens. So screens that normally might be underused. So maybe in post offices, in doctor healthcare offices, even in supermarkets, you actually see underused screens. So how can you actually create a much more sort of ubiquitous gaming environment for this? But let's see if this works. So we actually worked with the London College of Communications, which is where Varen actually did a course in, and right? And
yes, I did.
Yes, you did.
5 years ago.
And we mentor a lot of students in terms of thinking about sort of some of these problems. So this is a really fun project that one of them did. Over 10,000 people died because of jaywalking. How can you actually make people jaywalk less? They decided to gamify the experience by, if the light's green, you can play music. imagine, as we do, when we think about the ways that we might govern and manage our streets, what are the ways that urban interaction design can actually be a part of it? When you think about sort of moving from a quantified self to a quantified community, to being able to sort of bring together people and share shared experiences, what are some of the cues that actually leap off the screen that can provide that? So this is an audio cue. So thinking again in terms of how to bring back sensory experiences into real life so you actually look up. Actually trying to solve transgressive behavior is super hard. People actually like fixing the rules. You'll see this again and again as you sort of do field work. But I think that's pretty amusing because then you can actually think, one of the reasons why I wanted to show that was then you can sort of think through where would you actually place these installations? Why? Which sort of target groups could you appeal to? You're actually starting to think beyond sort of the programming into actual sound design. Actually, I think there were some other videos, but we'll just stop there. And I'll just tell you, instead of showing it to you, there's one of the other projects that the students worked on was thinking about how you could actually have an eco-advisor for 6-year-olds, right? So how can you actually teach people about sort of the climate change and consumption? And one of the ideas was to be able to create a furry animal that you could actually feed the receipt to. And then if the receipt actually had a high sort of carbon footprint, then the animal would emit a huge burp. If it was low, it would be a really light burp. So this was really interesting because it was a really great way of thinking about how do you actually take data and actually not show numbers, right? Show something else, show a totally different experience, and people loved it. Adults loved it. There was a problem though, and this is some of the things that I encourage you to actually do field work about, because what do people actually love to hear? What? Which one?
A large amount.
Yeah.
So they want dirty receipts.
They want dirty receipts. So it's really actually really, really fun as you think through when you're working with product design, data, urban interaction design, whatnot. How do you actually create these fantastic experiences that actually move just beyond data? So that's what I want to leave you with. We'll be here if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for the presentations.